Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to continue talking about the express powers of the legislative branch of the government. And we're going to start off by talking about what's called the money powers. Congress has several express powers related to money, including the power to tax, the power to borrow, the power to establish laws on bankruptcy, and the power to coin money. Those congressional powers have played an important part in the framing of our nation. Alright, so a tax expert helps a customer prepare his tax return. The complexity of the U.S. tax code, a result of Congress's express power to tax, spurred the rise of tax preparation services. So, businesses like H&R Block and things like that are all set up to help people understand and comply with the tax code of the government. And this is passed down by the Congress. The power to tax. The Constitution gives Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, and that is directly from the Constitution. The power to tax. The Articles of Confederation had not given Congress the power to tax. Congress did have the power to requisition funds from the states. That is, Congress could ask, in reality beg, each of the 13 states for money. But through the 1780s, not a single state came even remotely close to meeting the few requests that Congress made, and a number of them paid nothing at all. The government was impotent, and the lack of a power to tax was a leading cause for the creation of the Constitution. So, if you think back to your U.S. history class, you know that before we had the Constitution, we had what was called the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation was the original Constitution. You know, for the first small portion of our history as a country, we did not have the Constitution. We were under the Articles of Confederation. And this created a very weak central government. You might think, well, why did they make it so weak? Well, think about the government they had just got out from under. A king. Why would they? So they were the framers were very limited, very hesitant to create a government that had a strong central power, because they had just gotten out from under a strong central power. So they created the Articles of Confederation, which created a very loose government. And under the Articles of Confederation, the Congress did not have the power to tax. So they had no way to get money. So they just kind of asked the states to make donations. And while some did, like it says here, they didn't even come close to getting what they needed. So Congress needed the power to require the states to pay money. So from that came the power to tax. The purpose of taxes. Here are a number of important points regarding the taxing power. The federal government will take in some $2.1 trillion in fiscal year 2013, and almost certainly an even larger sum in 2014. Most of that money, well over 95% of it, will come from the various taxes levied by Congress. A tax is a charge levied by government on persons or property to raise money to meet public needs. But notice, Congress does sometimes impose taxes for other purposes as well. The protective tariff is perhaps the oldest example of this point. Although it does bring in some revenue every year, its real goal is to protect domestic industry against foreign competition by increasing the cost of imported goods. So these protective tariffs, while they do make money for the government, and its real goal was to protect domestic industry against foreign competition by increasing the cost of imported goods. So if you go to buy anything, let's say you're going to buy a car. If you buy a car that is an imported vehicle, meaning that it was created in another country and then brought here, there is going to be a tax on that vehicle that you wouldn't have to pay if you had bought a domestically created vehicle. Now, sometimes it is a big tax, sometimes it's small, but it's the reason that foreign created cars, in some cases, are more expensive, because they have those tariffs, those taxes on them, because they are a foreign created product. Now, domestically created products do not have those same taxes on them. And a lot of the times it's just built into the price. So whenever you go and you buy it, you may not, whenever you get your receipt, you may not explicitly say on your receipt that you paid that tax. It was just kind of built into the price. Limits on the taxing power. Congress does not have an unlimited power to tax. As with all other powers, the taxing power must be used in accord with all other provisions of the Constitution. Thus, Congress cannot lay a tax on church services, for example, because such a tax would violate the First Amendment. Nor could it lay a poll tax as a condition for voting in federal elections, for that would violate the 24th Amendment. Now, for a good portion of our history, if you wanted to vote in an election, you had to pay a tax. You actually had to pay for the right to vote. And while that was in effect for a long time, the 24th Amendment banned that. They said that it was unconstitutional to require people to pay a tax to vote. More specifically, the Constitution places 4 explicit limitations on the congressional power to tax. 1. Congress may tax only for public purposes, not for private benefit. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 says that taxes may be levied only to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. 2. Congress may not tax exports. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 5 declares, no tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. Thus, custom duties, tariffs, which are taxes, can be levied only on goods brought into the country, imports, not on those sent abroad, which are exports. So, these tariffs that are passed by Congress do not apply to goods that we export, that we send to another country to be sold. Now, that other country is probably going to have a tariff on that American good, which means that it is going to be more expensive in another country. So, while we don't tax our own exports, our exports are another country's imports, and they will probably have a tax on it themselves. So, that is a limit on the taxing power. 3. Direct taxes must be apportioned among the states according to their populations. A direct tax is one that must be paid directly to the government by the person on whom it is imposed. For example, a tax on the ownership of land or buildings, or a capitation, head or poll tax. Those are direct taxes because you pay that directly to the government yourself. An income tax is a direct tax, but it may be laid without regard to population. So, income tax, while it is a direct tax, it is scaled based on your income. So from the Constitution, we have these 2 parts directly. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. That comes from the 16th Amendment. Also, we have no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census of enumeration herein taken before directed to be taken. So, it's saying that some direct taxes have to be portioned based on the population of the state. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 provides that all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. That is, all indirect taxes levied by the federal government must be levied at the same rate in every part of the country. Those indirect taxes include the federal levies on gasoline, alcoholic beverages, and tobacco products. So, taxes on gasoline, you're going to have the same gasoline tax from the federal government no matter where you buy gasoline in the country. So that is why the gas tax that is passed by the federal government is the same in all states. As a general rule, an indirect tax is one first paid by one person but then passed on to another. It is indirectly paid by that second person. Take, for example, the federal tax on cigarettes. It is paid to the Treasury by the tobacco company, but is then passed on through the wholesaler and retailer to the person who finally buys the cigarettes. So a cigarette company, they have to pay a certain tax whenever they create cigarettes. Now, they pay that, the company pays that to the government, and then the company passes that cost on to the consumer. So whenever, let's say Congress is going to increase the cigarette tax next week. Let's say that. They're not. To my knowledge, they're not, but let's say that they are. So the cigarette companies will have to pay a higher cost. Now, in order to make that money up, they are going to increase the price of all cigarettes that they sell to make up for that tax. So, while the end consumer doesn't pay that tax, they are paying it in a way that is already built into the cost of what they are buying. So, they are paying it indirectly. The borrowing power. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2 gives Congress the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. There are no constitutional limits on the amount of money Congress may borrow and no restrictions on the purposes for borrowing. The Treasury does the actual borrowing. Usually, it issues Treasury notes, or T-bills, for short-term borrowing and bonds for long-term purposes. Those securities are, in effect, promissory notes, IOUs, for which the government agrees to pay investors a certain sum plus interest on a certain date. So let's talk about bonds for a moment. You can go to a bank and you can purchase a bond. And what that bond is it is a certificate. And that certificate says that whenever you can purchase this certificate and then turn it in at a later time, and whenever you turn that bond back in, you will get paid back the money that you paid for that bond plus a certain percent of interest over time. Now, the higher the interest rate on it, the more money the investor is going to make back. And that is, by purchasing that certificate, you are lending the government that money to use that they have to pay you back over time. So that's why it says an IOU. A bond is, all you're getting is a certificate that says that on a certain date you can turn that certificate back in and you'll get the money that you paid for that bond back plus a percent of interest on top of it. So that is why people will invest in bonds. It is a very secure investment that as long as the government still exists, you will get paid that money back. Congress has put a statutory ceiling on the public debt, however. The public debt is all of the money borrowed by the federal government over the years and not yet repaid, plus the accumulated interest on that money. That legal ceiling has never amounted to much more than a political gesture, however. Congress regularly raises the limit whenever the debt threatens to overtake it. The public debt is approximately $27 trillion. Whenever I was making this, I looked up what the public debt was currently, and it was up to $27 trillion. So that is a lot of debt. For decades, the federal government has practiced deficit financing. That is, it regularly spends more than it takes in each year and then borrows to make up the difference. Thus, the government has relied on deficit financing, on borrowing, to deal with the economic depression of the 1930s, to meet the extraordinary costs of World War II, and to pay for wars and social programs over the decades since then. In fact, the government's books showed a deficit in all but 7 years from 1930 to 1969, and they were in the red every year from 1969 to 1998. As a result, the public debt climbed to more than $5.5 trillion at the beginning of the fiscal year 1998. A concerted effort by a Republican-controlled Congress and President Bill Clinton did curb the soaring debt. In fact, it produced 4 straight years of budget surpluses from 1998 to 2002. So back during that time, the United States was not in debt, and there was actually a budget surplus, meaning that the United States had money in more than it did not have any debt. There was no debt during those years, and that was due to policies and ideas and things pursued by President Bill Clinton. The bankruptcy power. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 gives Congress the power to establish uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. A bankrupt individual or company or other organization is one a court has found to be insolvent, that is, unable to pay debts in full. Bankruptcy is the legal proceeding in which the bankrupt's assets, however much or little they may be, are distributed among those to whom a debt is owed. That proceeding frees the bankrupt from legal responsibility for debts acquired before bankruptcy. The states and the national government have concurrent power to regulate bankruptcy. Today, however, federal bankruptcy law is so broad that it all but excludes the states. Nearly all bankruptcy cases are now heard in federal district courts. The currency power. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 gives Congress the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. The states are expressly denied that power. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. Until the Revolution, the English money system built on the shilling and the pound was in general use in the colonies. With independence, that stable currency system collapsed. The Second Continental Congress and then the Congress under the Articles issued paper money, without sound backing and with no taxing power behind it. However, the money was practically worthless. Each of the 13 states also issued its own currency. Adding to the confusion, people still used English coins, and Spanish money circulated freely in the southern states. So this was a very chaotic time for currency in the United States, back whenever it was just the 13 states. Each state had its own money. So you could have Virginia dollars, New Jersey dollars, Pennsylvania dollars, and it comes with an issue. Well, if you're traveling state to state, if you live in Pennsylvania and all of your money is Pennsylvania dollars, and then you go to New Jersey, well, how many Pennsylvania dollars is a New Jersey dollar worth? Or vice versa? How many New Jersey dollars is a New York dollar worth? How many Alabama dollars is a North Carolina dollar worth? It just ends with a lot of confusion, and that is why the states were denied that power later on. Nearly all the framers agreed on the need for a single national system of hard money. So the Constitution gave the currency power to Congress, and it all but excluded the states from that field. Currency is money in any form when it is in use as a medium of exchange. From 1789 on, among the most important of all the many tasks performed by the federal government has been that of providing the nation with a uniform, stable monetary system. From the beginning, the U.S. has issued coins in gold, silver, and other metals. Congress chartered the first Bank of the United States in 1791 and gave it the power to issue banknotes, that is, paper money. Those notes were not legal tender, however. Legal tender is any kind of money that a creditor must by law accept in payments for debt. So the money that we use today is considered legal tender, meaning that people who do business in the United States are required by law to accept that money. So that's why if you look on any sort of dollar bills or anything, it says legal tender, meaning that businesses are required by law to accept that for their goods and services. Congress did not create a national paper currency and make it legal tender until 1862. Its new national notes, known as greenbacks, had to compete with other paper currencies already in the marketplace. Although the states could not issue paper money themselves, state governments could and did charter private banks, whose notes did circulate as money. When those private banknotes interfered with a new national currency, Congress, in 1865, laid a 10% tax on their production. The private banknotes soon disappeared. The Supreme Court upheld the 1865 law as a proper exercise of the taxing power in Viazzi Bank v. Fenno, 1869. At first, the greenbacks could not be redeemed for gold or silver. Their worth fell to less than half their face value on the open market. Then, in 1870, the Supreme Court held their issuance to be unconstitutional. In Hepburn v. Griswold, it said to coin meant to stamp metal, and so the Constitution did not authorize the national government to issue paper money. The court soon changed its mind, however, in the legal tender cases in 1871, and again in Juilliard v. Greenman in 1884. In both cases, it held the issuing of paper money as legal tender to be a proper use of the currency power. The court also declared this a power properly implied from both the borrowing and the war powers. Okay guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, you all know how to get a hold of me. I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon.